Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Bizarre. Today, we're talking about, AI image generators and Elon Musk and all kinds of interesting juvenile behavior. Then we're going to talk about, is California going to lead the way and maybe helping to rein in some of that behavior? And finally, we're going to have a little chat about what is the implications of AI for managing DevOps and AI teams in general. You're watching Techstrong Gang. We'll be back in a minute. All right, folks, we're back and we got a full house today. So let me introduce you to everybody who's joining us. From Futurum, we have Paul Nashawaty, who's the practice lead for application development and DevOps. Paul, good to see you.
Hey, great to be here.
Also, we have returning, as always, from Denver, Mitch Ashley, who's working both for Futurum as a chief technology advisor for DevSecOps and security, and also works for us at Techstrong as our CTO. Mitch, good to see you.
Put in both camps. Good to be here.
All right. Finally, we also have John Schwartz joining us from California, where he's our eyes and ears in the valley these days. John, how are you?
I'm good. Good to see you all.
And then we have joining us, of course, John Willis, who is our resident DevOps AI expert these days, and of course has a long history in the DevOps space. John, thanks for coming.
Hey, hold on.
And then finally, Tracy Ragan, who's joining us once again, I assume from the desert. But Tracy, I feel like if it's Friday, it must be Tracy Day. So here we are.
It is. I look forward to my Fridays with the gang.
Here we go. All right. Though, of course, most of you are watching this on Monday, but we need some time to actually record these things. So that's how it works. Otherwise known as the magic of television. Yeah. Let's jump in here. And I guess I'm going to go to John Schwartz first. We've been watching the rise of these AI image engines, I'll call them. And people have been playing with this stuff for a while, but in the last week, Elon Musk launched Grok 2 and started playing around with it on Twitter. I guess you can get at it if you have the right level of Twitter account. And suddenly, I think maybe it's just me or maybe I'm just noticing, but there seems to be like junky content everywhere now running around because people are creating these images. And Elon Musk, of course, was at the forefront of that, creating some things that were, depending on your point of view, tasteless. I don't know. I guess.
So more tasteless stuff from Elon. Yeah. But, yes. So I was talking yesterday with a AI animation studio called Toonstar, a couple of people who just left Warner Brothers, and they're creating all sorts of content that's incredibly popular on YouTube, TikTok, and Snapchat. And I mentioned Grok to them, Grok 2, and they said the name sounds like something out of a villain movie. And they also mentioned the danger of kind of going unbridled with these images. And it's the Wild West on X, right? I mean, we talked Friday on the show about Musk and X playing an increasingly large role in things like politics, what have you. And I can take a cursory look at what people are doing in the Grok's fun mode. And among other things, they're generating images of Kamala Harris as a dominatrix standing over Joe Biden, Donald Trump as Rambo, Mickey Mouse driving a Tesla. It's kind of boomeranged on Musk because some trolls have him depicted images of him taking part in school shootings. So it's going completely off the rails, right? And the concern is that this is going to play a role, mainly bad, across all sorts of things, not just politics. I mean, even the FBI, they have quietly resumed working with social media, which includes X, by the way, Facebook and YouTube, about monitoring disinformation from foreign nations. So this is all playing together, and it's going to lead to perhaps legislation. This might have been an influence on something we're going to talk about later, but it's really kind of a ticklish mess, and it also plays into things like intellectual property and rights and imaging. It's just he's opened a can of worms, but I'm sure he's delighted by doing this.
Yeah. John Willis, most of this stuff seems to be focused on images, but I've seen stuff where these AI models are going to create videos and entire narratives and maybe, who knows, a movie one day. Where are we on this journey here at this moment? I feel for the last year, we've been talking about AI models in the context of creating text and code, but is this the next phase?
Yeah, no, I mean, this phase started a while back. And, I think, started with OpenAI, really, I mean, at least from a I won't say commercial, but the general public understanding how this worked. It's been going on for quite a long time, but in general, the ability to match words to videos or pictures and images. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, you had sort of the race, you had DALL-E, you had Stable Diffusion, which brings on Mid-Journey, and then just got Mid-Journey, and then but the good news was that a lot of these players are at least trying to attempt to be good citizens, right? Yeah. But I think the alarming thing about Elon Musk in general is he doesn't seem to understand the idea of governors and stuff like that. So I think the new sort of Grok stuff is quite scary, to be honest with you. I mean, I went out and I looked at sort of on X, that trash bin that used to be amazing, and there's already just terrible stuff if you sort of follow the X.AI corporation's references to Grok, this Grok 2. So, and the video stuff, I would be honest with you, Mike, I hadn't gotten that deep into that. I know there was a real interesting, I think within the last month or two, like a 30-second video that blew everybody's mind, which was quite scary for Hollywood and everybody like that. That it really was sort of a 30-second full-length movie really fully generated with generative AI. But yeah, I mean, the only other thing is the Grok 2 thing's interesting because it's already come out. It's like they put out a stealth version of the model, and it shows up fourth on one of the leading leaderboards for basically tied with all the sort of mini versions, the GPT-4 Mini, the Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and so right out of the gate, it's our top 5 on the leaderboard.
Well, I think it speaks really to our culture. I mean, if we want to blame somebody, let's blame the supermarket tabloids. They've been doing this kind of stuff for how long, right? And now we're just seeing it in a social media perspective. And if I guess Elon Musk has decided that X should be like a supermarket tabloid, and that's the market he is targeting. So every individual, have a responsibility. Do we want to open up that tabloid and start looking at the cesspool of crap that comes from X now? I mean, we have made a decision to get off of X altogether. I'm slowly migrating us off, and I'm going to make a final announcement to say, hey, we're done. But it's a culture, and every single one of us, every single citizen in this, social media world, we have to make our own decisions about what we really want to see. And do we regulate that? I don't know. Have we regulated the supermarket tabloids? Never. So how is this any different? I don't know. I don't know if it's different.
Well, I was watching this interview with Justine Bateman, who back in the day was a sitcom actress, but today is a director. And she was saying that we're going to see a massive amount of what she described as throwaway content. Some of it will be created by people and others will be created by studios. And from her point of view, it will be disposable and eventually people will get bored with it sooner than later, she was predicting, because a lot of it's just going to be maybe slightly better than the junk you're already seeing. And her other point, though, is it's going to force the people who are trying to make money in this space to produce better content that's more interesting and more compelling. So, John Schwartz, I know that there's a lawsuit floating around on this stuff, but what's your take?
Well, it's interesting that you said that, and totally bravo to John and Tracy for calling out what X is. It's a trash bin. It's basically turned into our latter day national tabloid. Those things are kind of just gone away, and for the most part, like News of the World. But yes, this is interesting what's happening in terms of content creation. There used to be an era, remember, this is a long time ago, but Disney, Pixar, et cetera, all the studios would try to make content that was enduring, that would last. And now we're in an era of AI where everything's hyper accelerated, where you create this junk. Maybe it's just for 15 minutes. The Warhol, to cite from Andy Warhol, you create 15 minutes of memorable junk to influence the politics of the day or the hour, right? Because we can't remember what happens in this news cycle, these news cycles from day to day, it all seems like it's taken place a decade ago. And so what we have is we have people just spitting out garbage, influencing folks who may not be educated on what really is reality. And it's terrifying to me. And Justine Bateman is spot on. I mean, maybe it'll spur others to make valuable content, but my fear is that it's just going to be a huge vacuum, a huge hurricane, tidal wave, tsunami, whatever you want to call it, of terrible content, short term with an agenda.
Now, it's not isolated to social media. I am still furious with Palo Alto Networks and their lampshade.
Oh yeah, we talked about that on Friday.
How is that? It's not any different, right? It's exactly the same. Except there were real people sitting in a professional environment with people who look like me walking in the door, seeing that, and probably turning away, going back to their hotel rooms, because that's what I would have done. So, this is our culture right now.
We've been doing this a long time, and I think I'm older than most people on this call, but you remember that there was the days back in the large conferences where it was all about that. And I thought we had gotten rid of that stuff.
Right.
I thought it was like gone, right? Like even about 8 years ago, some vendor did something like that and they got hammered and they apologized. But to see Palo Alto do that was just mind blowing.
An apology at this point is not enough. What needed to happen was the CMO needed to get fired and the CEO should have resigned. That's how furious I am.
Guys, I'm gonna call it into the Palo Alto conversation. We did that last week, so let's just keep moving.
Just an aside, I'm going to meet with the CMO from Palo Alto Network supposedly soon, and I'm going to bring it up because I thought, as you said, John, I thought the era of the booth babes was long over, but around.
That's the last word on that.
Mike, to kind of take us back to the conversation, one of the things I'm curious to see is this reminds me of when we first started seeing synthetic characters being generated in movies, right? Mm-hmm. And then what we realized is there were people behind it. To really get an authentic, a character in a movie, you have to have a person who's doing, wearing the green and the tennis balls or ping pong balls on them and actually act out. And that shows up in video games today as well as movies. If AI can accurately synthesize and generate video of people interacting and walking and doing things like that, maybe that's the next generation of movies, of film, where we really do have totally synthetic characters.
Yeah, Mitch.
It has that potential.
Yeah, Mitch, I agree with you. I think that when you look at the tools that are in front of us, I basically use social media for business purposes only, pretty much. And as last I checked, most companies, use very specific platforms, and X is one of them. And because of that, that's a vehicle for communication of this research and this information. But Mitch, I agree with you 100% that if there's a way to make it more efficient, to drive the better results, to have the right content created, as long as it's sourced properly and it says that there's a disclaimer that says this is what it's being used for and how it's being used, then it's, we're all responsible. As I said on previous episodes, organizations are accountable for their actions, right? And if you use information blindly, then that's not a good way to do it, right? But I like where you were going, Mitch, of tying it back to there's some skill behind it. It's not just kind of blindly just creating stuff, in a vacuum.
Right. It's kind of like Photoshop on steroids right now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Everything's.
It'll get more nuanced, though. Justine Bateman was pointing out, we'll have movies in the future where you can just insert your image into where Luke Skywalker is and you can be part of the movie. And that part of the thing might be entertaining for folks. But if you're going to rewrite the entire movie, and then distribute it, you're probably going to get sued by somebody. There's also go ahead.
I mentioned really quickly that Krista Wolf, who is one of the principals at MySpace, as a startup that's kind of doing that idea where they're going to start with these very, very short videos where you insert yourself in a major movie. And so it is happening, yes.
Right. But there is this other study out there that pointed out the following and said, just because we give tools to these people doesn't mean that they're creative. And one of the things that it surmises is that eventually people who go create content are going to create the same boring content over and over again. And there's just going to be stuff that is variation on a theme, because not everybody is as clever as a Hollywood scriptwriter. And so a lot of this stuff, will it ultimately be entertaining? I don't know. I think we might get bored pretty quickly with the Mitch movie that sounds just like the John Willis movie that sounds just like the Paul Nashawaty movie. So,
until AI can judge what is good creativity or not, what is interesting content, what is not, that's the human in the loop until that point in time, because it's going to generate whatever it's having access to for data, as well as what we instruct it to do. Doesn't mean it's good content, but in terms of it taking over and doing things like that, I think that's the big gap, filling in that real kind of human element that we still need today.
All right. I will take the other side of that argument, though. It is more than probable that there are very talented people out there who could create things using these tools that would never get a shot otherwise, because the cost of creating the stuff is too high, and they don't know the right people, and they can't, they don't have the funds to spend 2 years creating this stuff. So we might see, more interesting nuggets appearing in the stream of crap coming our way.
Yeah, that studio that I was talking to has created this series called Stephen and Parker, which is getting, I think on YouTube, it's getting like 30 million viewers a week. And by comparison, they were telling me that a good week for The Simpsons now is like 3 to 4 million a week. So there is an audience. That's an animated series that is based on good content that children like, boys and girls. So there are positives among all the morass of crap.
Tracy, you got any hope for us here? What's your sense of, are you just going to tune out altogether and just write code?
I think that I tune out a lot, to be honest. I don't watch a lot of, I limit my time on these social networking channels. But I think Mitch is right. We're going to get bored with it. We're intelligent beings, right? We're going to get tired of the sensationalism of a meme. And it's just going to get uglier and uglier, and eventually nobody's going to be interested in looking at it. There'll be a section of our population that will continue to want to see it, and they'll market to those people. That's just who we are.
All right, folks. I think we've gotten to the bottom of this topic as far as it's going to go for now. Elon, he's making a case for free speech and ultimate free speech, and you can do anything you want. And there's a lot of tech bros out there that kind of agree with him. And then there's, my copyright laws and all those good things out there that enforce my rights, and courts are going to sort this all out. Folks, we'll be back in a minute. All right, folks, we're back and continuing this conversation a little bit around AI and its role in, society and as it applies to content. There's a bill going through the legislative process in the state of California that's gotten everybody in the Valley taking note of, this thing seems a little more stringent than anything that's been talked about so far. But John, I know you looked at this. Walk us through what's in this bill and why are the folks in the Valley starting to freak out a little bit?
Sure. I'll give you just an overview first, and then I'll give you an update. So SB 1047, which comes from a state senator named Scott Wiener, mandates a safety protocol to prevent AI misuse. It includes an emergency stop button to shutter an AI model. Usually it's the large model. Developers are also responsible for testing procedures that address risk, as well as receiving annual audits from third parties. So there's this new state agency called the called the Frontier Model Division in California, which would oversee the rules. And if you don't comply with the rules, you're subject to a civil action levied by the state attorney general of up to $10 million for the first violation and $30 million for subsequent violations. The problem is that there wasn't a lot of give and take between the state senator and the tech industry. So consequently, I received an email from his handler this morning. They are making amendments. Does that sound familiar? They're making amendments to the bill, and they're trying to kind of follow the model of the EU AI Act, which I guess they got ahead of the situation by talking to tech more deeply than in this situation. In a sense, one of the people I talked to in the tech industry said, you know what, all we really need to do is we need AI to write the legislation, because AI moves so quickly that by the time this bill was written, it's obsolete. So they're again advocating this idea of self monitoring, which, you know how well that worked with the social media companies. So we've got this whole ballyhoo, the brouhaha, where the large companies are most exposed to this bill, and the smaller companies and the developers are up in arms about the impact it will have on them. So eventually, we'll see where this goes. I mean, we've gone through this before with privacy laws in California. I'm sure this will be altered significantly in the coming days, but it's just another thing to consider as AI pervades its way through our society.
John Willis, I know you've been following some of these legal conversations around AI. Where does this fit in this broader conversation?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is I went back to see, there's this all the debates. I'm identified. I've said this before. I'm about 3/4 of the way done with a book on the history of AI. So I really understand all the players going back from the 40s to now. So I wanted to find out what they consider the godfathers of AI. It's Geoffrey Hinton, Giorgio Bengio, and John LeCun, right? And they're sort of the modern day godfathers. Their take on it is California first is not a bad idea. Mm-hmm. Like, it's going to start somewhere. It should be California. And Bengio is basically, we can't let the big organizations grade their own homework. But on the other side, the negative is what the woman they call the godmother of AI, which is Fei-Fei Li. And if you hadn't read her book, it's incredible, The World We See. And she's probably more responsible for computer vision in modern times than anybody, and you could read her book. But she's negative, and she's got some interesting points. One, is it going to create interesting liabilities? Like, will the person who sets the model weights, can they get sued? Right? Like, and I think of, like, she didn't say this, but think about autonomous vehicles, right? I think we've done a fairly good job on, like, will there be a day where a coder of an autonomous vehicle will get sued because the car makes a decision? I don't know, but I think it opens up a can of worms that we got to be really careful for. People much smarter than me. Could it be an open source killer? Is one of her points. Will it kill research? And last but not least is, if you read her book and then some follow-on books, is that she's like, they're missing the real point, which is bias, gender bias. There is, racial bias, and these things are real. Like, people are getting arrested by facial recognition systems, and according to her, it's non-existent in the bill. So, anyway, that was my sort of quick take of, like, all this.
Yeah, a lot of those things that you mentioned, John, were mentioned by some of the folks I talked to. I talked to 6 or 7 developers. Open source killer was among their liability, was another major issue. Actually, there's a report that Mike passed on to me by MIT about AI risk repository. And some of those dangers that are outlined in the MIT report are trying to be addressed in this bill. And again, you're right. California usually is the model for pretty good legislation in terms of tech, because there's no national legislation to speak of. And it's a model for other states, and they usually fall on the path.
Yeah, I think I really agree with Dr. Lee. I'm not sure this is the right direction to go for legislation, only because where is the accountability falling? It's falling on the model, not on the application that's consuming the data. And I almost feel like that's where it should be regulated, and it shouldn't matter if you're $100 million into it or not. Mm-hmm. It should be who's accountable, and who's accountable is the consumer of that data, of that model. So I'm kind of with Dr. Lee on this one.
Yeah, 100%. And I know, Mitch, you had some thoughts there, but this 100% behind that statement, because if it's accountability of the application creator and the organization putting it out, that's where the buck stops. It's not just because it was available. It has to have ownership, because the other side of it is if it's regulation that's in California that may not be enforceable outside of California, how do you enforce it? How do you move it when you cross state lines or cross country lines? So I think that it comes down to the responsibility of the organization creating the code. Again, I keep on this thread in a couple of different sessions that we've had. I've said the same thing, where I think that the accountability has to fall with the creator. And that's where you kind of go back to putting the constraints.
But I think her point, though, is that that's danger here. If we start sort of narrowing in on the creator, maybe the developer or the person who did the weight training, we got to have an incredible complex, because it's non-deterministic. We all know that. Anyway, the way I read her is not like, let's nail the person who wrote this. It's like it's going to be a can of worms of figuring out. And if we open up legislation that can sort of narrowly point to those type of lawsuits, we got ourselves really.
John, what this makes me also think of is there are analogies to this in other parts of our world, our business world. One is protection of gun manufacturers from being sued. Do the AI companies go for that? Section 230 for social media. Those are the kind of regulations I'm also concerned about, right? So that I don't want anybody running unfettered without being accountable for the content, the decisions, whatever. So I'm not in favor of either of those two pieces of legislation. But I think that's a danger too, is that we also legislate no accountability into this. And now you have protections.
Let me throw this out to John Willis for a second here, though. There are people who are saying that much like we have the Department of Energy that keeps track of how nuclear energy is used and consumed, and so far generally doing a good job, at least, there's been incidents here and there, but do we need some sort of equivalent for AI where we're going to have an agency that's going to track the usage of this and kind of stay on top of it and make sure that it doesn't run away from us?
Absolutely, but we need the right people, right? And so if you follow the DevOps world, you probably know John Allspaw, Richard Cook, and Dr. Woods, right? And the Dr. Woods was the guy who went in after 3 Mile Island. That was his first gig after he got his first PhD, right? And all about the way that he went into Columbia Challenger. So I feel really positive you're bringing those type of thinkers who are doing systems thinking, not looking for who to blame. And yes, we're going to need that type of intelligence. The scary thing is new technology, new ideas. It's sort of the gravity goes right to who do we punish, who do we, and then over time we get a little mature about how we do sort of postmortems and analysis of sort of huge.
There's like a historical perspective for me, at least from the Valley point of view, is that just think back 3 decades to when online gambling became a big thing. And there was this idea, there was a senator in Arizona named John Kyle who came up with a national bill to address it. But the reason why he was trying to address it was because there really wasn't an effective law in the U.S. There was a 1961 Wire Act during the Kennedy administration that wasn't really applicable. And eventually it took 7 or 8 versions of the bill to finally get it right. And I'm afraid AI moves so much more faster than where we were 2 years ago, generative AI in particular, that this is going to be really difficult to thread the needle on something like this. And there's always that big disconnect between the political side and the technology side. It's so frustrating because I've seen this for years where they just can't interact and they don't understand one another. They have different motivations. And it's just something that will continue to be a problem or an issue for decades to come. I'm afraid.
Tracy, what's your level of confidence in politicians being able to sort this out?
Hello. I'm sorry, but I've been in technology all my life, and I struggle with looking at these bills and trying to think it through. And I feel like what we often do is we rush to try to do something. And when we rush to try to do something, we literally follow the logic of failure, right? Because we don't get all the pieces and parts that we really need to understand and be able to manage it. And, laws that are pushed through at this level with this raw of a technology, I think we'll make some mistakes along the way. But as John pointed out, it's going to take us some time, and it changes so fast. So again, I feel like these laws have to be about accountability and where the accountability should lay. And I guess that is a discussion. Is it in the models or is it in the consumer of the models? And at the end of the day, somebody's going to have a lawsuit. That's just all there is to it. There's going to be a lawsuit.
Oh, yeah. That's inevitable, right? Whenever. And then that'll be addressed as part of the legislation, right? It's just like this cyclical thing that goes on and on and on. One other thing I was going to mention is that one of the most influential senators, right, arguably of the last half century, is Dianne Feinstein, right, from California. I remember doing a story about her and tech, and she had a lot of responsibilities. She was looking over a lot of different things, but she had no relationship with tech. This was back in the late 90s, and they had no relationship with her. And I thought, if that happens in California among Feinstein, this is a problem.
Well, you bring up an interesting conversation then, and I'll toss this to Mitch, I guess, for grins. Should there be some sort of analysis of the AI tech savviness of people running for office? Is this going to become a part of the political conversation about what they know? Because there's so much at stake. I'm getting a little uncomfortable with electing people who have no idea what this stuff is.
I'm not sure they can use email, so I don't think we can rely on their AI skills. I would much rather, pull in a John or a Tracy or Paul and say, okay, tell us what's the best thing to do? How should we handle this? Have that debate. One
thing, Mitch, that's interesting. So I live in a congressional district that's heavily tech oriented, but the two candidates here who are running in November have they have their policy sheets right on their website, and they have a separate sheet for tech policies in addition to everything else. And I'm wondering if we might start seeing more of that just to show your bona fides. I think there will be a limited number of people in a limited number of states or districts who will do that, but it's something that's starting to crop up more often. At least that's one sign of encouragement to try to be positive.
The last thing is I want some AI entrepreneur running for Congress, and we're going to rely on that one person, right?
Yeah.
They happen to know the tech. I think we've got, this is like security. We have to rely on the best experts. It's evolving, it's changing. And we have to, help those minds get together and figure out what we need to do. What's the right thing to do?
I guess you're telling me I should put away that "let's draft John Willis for Congress" memo.
No, I was hoping you meant John Schwartz, because that would be a terrible idea.
I don't think anybody here is running, at least not yet.
All right. Is it feasible? And this will be the last question on this topic, but I'll toss it to John Willis. Can we? And I've seen some efforts to do this, and do we need to put everybody in a room and have some great AI summit where everybody is going to have these conversations, because it is so fundamental to our future? And yet I feel like all these conversations are happening in a hodgepodge fashion.
Well, I think, again, I'm trying to dust my memory off, and I'm not going to try to Google fast enough to remember what it was, but it was actually a summit that California had where they brought in AI groups, and maybe John Schwartz, maybe you remember a little more.
Yeah, well, there was, remember what Schubert tried to do, right?
They brought a whole bunch of people in, and
they had, I think they had, I know they had three of them, John. The first one was just the large AI players, which pissed off everyone else, so they had to bring in smaller companies because the large AI rulers.
That's right.
They write the rules. Yeah.
But I think that from what I understand, a lot of this, it wasn't just like the senator just said, "Hey, I'm going to create a bill." I think this has been a road that's been traveled a little bit with a little bit what you're looking for. So maybe we're getting a little smarter here about, I don't have an opinion either way. I agree with Tracy more. I fall on the Pepe Lee side, but I think there is So they're not just throwing darts on the board. They spent some time trying to figure this out. So it's a decent model of where we're going. So.
And it does work to some extent. I mean, the OpenSSF did a lot of, and still do, they do a lot of work with Washington. They have conferences there. But the irony of that is, I went to one of those and I sat in the room with Google and Apple and IBM and Microsoft thinking, these are the same companies that buried zero-day vulnerabilities for years and years and years. So, who is the fox guarding the hen house, so to speak?
All right.
So who's going to be in that room? We got to have the right people.
I do think, Mike, back to your energy question, do you need a regulatory agency? Well, in the energy industry, we have nuclear physicists that get together at conferences and talk about the challenges, right? We have the National Institute or Energy Institute, organizations like that help these conversations to happen. So I think there's some good models to look to of what we can do around AI.
All right. In the AI space, we have Elon Musk, freedom of speech, and boy, democracy is still messy. Hey, we'll be back in a minute.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, folks, we're back, and we're going to shift a little bit of a gear here on this AI conversation, but it's really about how should IT be structured in the age of AI, and it's an ongoing conversation. We have an article up on DevOps.com talking about now is not the time to embrace no ops and let the processes run wild because, well, AI, perhaps, as you've seen in our earlier segments, isn't everything it might be cracked up to be. And that then starts a whole conversation about whether or not we should have chief AI officers. So we're going to jump into that in a minute. But Paul, what is your assessment right now of what can AI do in an IT workflow? What can we rely on, and what is, aspirational?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. When we look at AI, there's this kind of utopian view of saying how it's going to solve the world problems, but the challenge that a lot of organizations are running into with regards to operations and DevOps and developers and such is there's really a maturity that organizations are kind of struggling with. Honestly, what we see is in our research, we see from, whether it's an SMB or an enterprise company, you have organizations that have IT and lines of business, IT DevOps and lines of business, IT DevOps SREs and lines of business, IT platform engineering and lines of business, and anything in between, right? And so there's just kind of a plethora of different kind of structures and methodologies that people are using. But what we find in our research is, and I have done some trending data about this, is year over year, we've seen a growth of organizations that responded that employed DevOps either in a limited or an extensive fashion. 71% 2 years ago to 75% of respondents are increasing their use of DevOps within their organizations. Now, the reason why that's important is because we talk about AI kind of being a way to, take over the operational side of the house. But, we have to remember that many of these organizations, whether as SMBs or large enterprises, are still struggling with just general methodologies, never mind what tool stack to use, right? So that 71 to 75% growth, yeah, we see that there's a lift in the adoption of using DevOps, a good lift of using adoption. I think it's necessary. We also see in our research that 9 months ago, production applications, only 18% of production applications were using AI in production. But we ran that study 9 months later, that number jumped to 54%. And what we also found in a recent study that, 90+%, 94% of production applications are starting to use AI in their workflows. So there's definitely a pendulum swinging very fast to use AI there. And to, echo what Mitch was talking about earlier, there's definitely a need to have a human in the loop. So having a no-ops environment is not the answer. Although what we do find is those organizations that effectively can adopt AI solutions are seeing roughly a 250% increase in development speed. So they are seeing a significant lift in pushing code out the door. And again, because I'm an analyst, I keep throwing stats out there. The other stat that kind of comes to mind is many of these organizations, actually 24% of these organizations, are looking to push code out the door on an hourly basis, yet only 8% can do so. So if there is that desire to move towards a rapid cadence of releasing code out the door, there may be a desire to have a no-ops solution and have a tech stack deal with it, but we're nowhere near that level of complete automation. At least I wouldn't feel comfortable recommending that to organizations. And I don't think most CIOs would say, that's fine, we're just going to let AI do its job.
And I don't even know what those tools would look like at this point with the DevOps platforms we have now. We're talking about platforms that are very long in the tooth, and they're not agile themselves. We can't easily build AI into some of these workflows. It's going to take a real shift in the way that we approach DevOps for doing two things. One, building AI into the DevOps process. We have to have the data. We don't even collect it. It's in logs everywhere. And two, being able to bring in tooling to support AI code, because it's going to look different. There's going to be new testing tools and new ways of deploying. So we've got a long way to go before this is going to happen. And right now we can't even put an SBOM in a workflow. I mean, let's be honest. We can't, there's millions of work scripts that we can't update. So it's going to take
respond to that though. That makes a lot of that. Actually, you hit on a couple of key data points. One, the SBOM is an executive order now with most companies. So you have to follow that compliance, right? So that's a requirement for a lot of the SDLC. But to your earlier point about complexity and tools, we see that 75% of respondents in our survey of over 850 respondents are using 6 to 15 different tools to do, just gather information about what's going on within the CI/CD pipeline and not even actionable insights. But this is like just understanding the data. So there's so much data being thrown in it. There's a great amount of opportunity for AI to come in and clean that up. But I agree with you. It's not there. Not even close. Not even close.
Here's the thing, right? It's not, and I'm not just, I agree with everything both of you just said, but and I love data too, but too many people think this is a binary thing. And this is sort of AI in general, but certainly in the DevOps space. I just got in an argument with Andrew Clay Schaefer, one of my best friends, right? We spent way too much time on chat arguing on this point. And I think I finally convinced him it's not an either or. It's not like, is it going to do everything or not? And so when you start thinking that way, you literally start thinking about the incremental advancements and optimizations you get. And so, like, for example, some of the stuff going on, in agentic sort of automation tools, like Microsoft they haven't publicly released it yet, but it's a Copilot workspaces. You literally can grab an issue on a GitHub, and it will walk through, analyze the repo, give you a proposal, allow you to mutate the proposal, then create the code changes, and then basically, if you hit it, it'll create a pull request. And there's about 15 other tools like OpenDevin, Amazon Q Workflow. I mean, this is an aggressive space. Now, I'll tell you, I've used this stuff aggressively because I'm DevOps, right? So I really want to try to understand what it works. A lot of it, it's for the easy stuff, like I'm adding a parameter or somebody left the code parameter off, it fixes it brilliantly. Give it a hard problem, and it falls off the cliff. And I would say the Microsoft workspace is probably I don't have the actual data. I'm going to try to get the data to say it probably is the most advanced tool for modern enterprise stuff. Because a lot of stuff's going on right now is like a bunch of like, it's sort of a game, and I don't want to diminish all the incredible work people are putting into it, but it's like, here's all the Python open source tool problems there are. We already know what those are in the models, and we're going to fix them, right? Like, but what I'm going after is like real live banking Java code, right? And I'm finding that the Microsoft Copilot Workspace is pretty darn sophisticated, and what you would expect. But even then, on the hard problems, but here's the beauty of it. What I'm not thinking is, oh, it didn't create the perfect fix, therefore I can't use it.
Yeah.
It takes me 60% there. It finds me exactly in a code base I know nothing about. It literally pinpoints the code I need to look at. So as long as we stop thinking about like it's going to be everything or nothing, and how these tools can just create all these advancements, and I agree, Tracy, it's a mess. But if we, and I'm not saying you think like this, but if we stop thinking that it can or it can't, and we start thinking about, okay, you're right. If we can't even map the dependency map with SBOMs, like how we go, well, there are things we can do. We can use AI to discover dependencies from a repo, right? Like, and so I guess I'm rambling now, but I think all these things are, the glass is definitely half full if you look at it. So,
John, I can share some data to back up what you're stating, though, right? I mean, I think it is an evolution. It's a maturity. And if you look at it, depending on the organization, what we find in our research that, GitHub and such provides its critical part of the CI/CD pipeline. But like, just to kind of back up some of the points you were talking about, 53% of respondents say that they use GitOps to do better collaboration. We see that 43% are using it as a single source of truth, right? 40% are using it as for tool independence, and then 38% of respondents are using it to harmonize and standardize code repositories. All of these things that you're talking about are steps in order to get to that kind of view of where they want to go to. But if you take that response from the respondents of the survey, and then somehow roll that into a platform, an AI platform that can actually use that data to say this is how it's going to mature and help organizations, that'll get us closer to the, quote, no ops space.
And just to take that a little bit further too, Paul, we just released a study called AI-augmented DevOps, and very intentionally called it AI-augmented. Because to your point, John, it's not the autonomous software development, like autonomous driving. It's an augmented tool to help you do development, do testing, whatever part of that it is. We asked how much do you trust the output of something that's been created by AI, whether it's a test plan or new code or a change to code. And a fraction, 14%, said they take it as is and move on, which I think is incredibly high. But most people realize that AI needs adult supervision. So you have to look at the output. I think one of the challenges with it is, even in our own testing of software, we don't know always what is an open source library versus what Mitch wrote, or what John contributed from pulling something down from OpenStack, or who knows where that stuff came in. So we have to really think comprehensively about our testing strategies and not rely on knowing this was generated.
I want to get this point in before, is that I was talking to somebody the other day, and they made a good point. Like, you think about a place like Capital One, right? At one point, I think they had 20,000 Java developers, right? They follow design patterns. There's Gang of Four patterns, right? And the design patterns of that, right? So those places are going to have a much better chance of having highly optimized systems. Yeah. If the models can be trained, they probably, most of the common frontier models have those patterns in them. But if they're not, again, I think it goes back to what Tracy said. Like, and I know you didn't say it exactly like this, but it's garbage in, garbage out. If you're terrible at doing your infrastructure, your pipelines, you have no sort of pattern designs this AI stuff's going to make your life a lot worse. But
let me ask this question then, because we alluded to it at the start of the thing, but CEOs have a tendency when they hear these kinds of issues, they'll go, wow, that sounds hard. And then the first thing that comes to mind is, let's make this somebody else's responsibility. And so we're going to appoint somebody to be the chief AI officer. John, I know you have some opinions on this. Is that the way to go, or do we need it to be more like something that just permeates through the organization naturally over time?
I don't know what the right answer is. I think my instinct is the wrong answer to bifurcate the C-level from a CIO and a chief IO. Mark Schwartz wrote a book called Seat at the Table, and he was the head of Border and Security, for Homeland Security, right? And he said that like a chief data officer was a cop-out, and I'm summarizing, right? I mean, like, why was a chief data officer on the same level of as a CIO? It's network computing storage, folks, right? And so I think there's a push to do a chief AI officer right now because, there's a competitive advantage of bringing somebody at that level. Maybe you get the kind of person that really has the chops to do innovation, understands the technology the business doesn't really understand. The negative is if you see that as a proxy for supporting the brand, basically, which is your sort of the CIO responsibility, then from an IT perspective, I think it's a huge mistake. So quickly, the positives are you need a disruptor, somebody who probably wouldn't go to work for your company unless you made a role called chief AI officer, and there's all the positives. The negatives are if you sort of blindly say, well, that's not the CIO's responsibility, you are going to wind up in a world of hurt down the road. I talked to a large company the other day, and that they're not a chief AI officer, but the person who is running a lot of like Wall Street Journal stuff that they're going to pronounce. I asked the VP of engineering AI, might as well have been chief AI officer because clearly on an island. I asked if they had any discussions with the CISO, and the answer was no. It's like, you can take your aspirin now, you can take your aspirin later, but you're going to be taking aspirin, my friend.
So the devil's in the details on this too, because if you're doing let's hire an expert and they're going to make all those decisions and all the knowledge and skills, you can rely on that chief whatever officer. Bad mistake. I think of it more of like a digital transformation, someone who's leading this effort, whatever title you give them, right? Looking at AI to say, how can this technology help us in our products and our services, in our operational efficiencies? Where should we be investing in? And looking at where we can apply the technology, working with the CISO, the CIO, the head of product, all of the organization, saying, here's an opportunity. We want to make sure we maximize it to our benefit, maybe look at some defensive measures. But to your point, John, isolating is that I'm the data expert, so I'll make the data decisions. It is like we were saying before, AI systems don't operate standalone, very few of them. Mm-hmm. All of them tie into other systems. And their value is through what those other systems and the people who use those applications get out of it. So think of it as how are we going to use this, not who is responsible for making all the decisions about it.
Yeah, Mitch, I think one thing to add here, anecdotal information is great, and having like a couple of conversations with different customers is actually boots on the street is really a good kind of validation point. As an analyst, I look at it in the context of data and such. I have a study of 378 respondents. To your point of spend, and John, also to your point, where they're investing, 91% of respondents are looking to invest in their strategies around not just resources, but where they're looking to invest in 2024 is acquiring new skills around AI and having those resources available that have somebody that's responsible for those AI strategies. Hire more personnel is what they're looking to do. Good luck with that. You'll never find them. But if you do, cool. The other big factor, 40% of respondents indicated that they're looking at working with service delivery partners to get their job done. So they're working with experts in the space. Going back to our accountability conversation earlier, if they pass the buck to somebody else and say, okay, if you know how to do this, you're the accountable one. The other thing that was interesting is implementing cross kind of platform ecosystem solutions across and observability, 42%, but 52% of respondents for top spending intentions for 2024 was to improve collaboration across DevOps, application developers, and IT operations, exactly to what Mitch was talking about, right? Which is, it can't be done in that silo. And John, you mentioned that silo of, okay, I'm going to look at my four walls and that's it. That's not what these respondents are saying. They're saying we want to invest. 52% actually saying that they want to invest in that collaboration across those organizations.
All right. Last word on this, Tracy. You going to hire an AI officer or what?
No, this is the responsibility of the architect. If we have a chief architect, it is an architectural decision, and that's where it belongs.
All right, folks, you heard it here. All I know is never take a job where you're responsible for something, but you have no authority. So keep that in mind when you're actually thinking about what title to take on. Folks, thanks for sharing your thoughts and insights today. As always, you guys were awesome. I want to thank everybody for watching this episode, and stay tuned because we got an awesome lineup of content coming up on Techstrong TV right behind us. See you next time.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.